Good day there guys, welcome to your tutorial. In this video we're going to be looking at sharing data using the input and output decorators. So for this tutorial I've set up a parent component and I've set up a child component. So this is pretty much what the UI looks like. We have the parent component and then we have the actual child component, which is the note with the description and a remove button. So looking back at the code, you can see that I've already included the child component with the CSS selector, and in the component class I also have a note array set up already. And in the note card component you can see I have the description text, which is currently hard coded, and then a remove button. So the first thing that we're going to do is basically going to take the data coming in from the parent. So I'm going to basically use the input decorator to replace this hard-coded text with the value coming in, and then I'm basically going to look at the remove button, which is just going to emit using the output decorator, is basically going to emit an event which will bind to on the parent side. So let's start off with the input decorator. So to start things off, we're just going to say at input, and I'm just going to call this note, and the note will be of type note. So basically I have an interface set up. This interface is over here. You can see it just has an ID and a description. Just need to import this. There we go. So now that we have the note over here, we can see now we've set up a property called note, which is basically based on the note type, and we're using the input decorator for this. So meaning now that this note card component now has a property that you can bind to, which is called note. So now on the markup side, I just basically want to replace this text. So we're using the interpolation for this, and this is going to be description. So basically based on this, we know that because it's of type note, we're going to have a description and we're going to have an ID. So now that we have this set up, we basically need to go ahead and head over to the parent component. So now we have a property that we can bind to. So we have a note, and on the parent side we have a list of notes. However, just for what I want to show now, I'm going to use let's say I'm going to display this item. So just to show the initial look, I'm just going to say cool, just pass through one of these notes, and we're going to save that. Once we head over to the UI, you can see it changed to be the second item in the array, which we've wanted. So now, as you can see, this user notes is an array. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace the hard-coded index, and I'm going to just set up a for loop, and I'm going to place this in that. And let's say user note of user notes, and instead of that hard-coded one, we're just going to go pass through user note. So essentially the same thing. It's just that we're going to have multiple of these app note cards. So instead of us passing through one value, this is just basically creating a list of them. So but nothing changes in terms of the child component. The child component itself still only takes in a single note. As you know, just with the for loop, it's just loops, and we'll just basically hit multiple of these cards. So if we head over to the UI, we should see a nice list of notes. As you can see, we now have our data coming through. This text gets set from the parent side, and next up we have the output decorator. So for the output decorator, essentially we're going to add that onto the child component. We're basically going to create a event emitter, or we're going to basically create a custom event. We're going to use the event emitter class, which is from Angular core, and essentially we're going to emit the event which contains the ID of the node that was selected. So for example, if we click remove on this specific item, ideally we want this remove button to capture the ID and emit the event to the parent, which will let the parent know which item to basically remove in the array. So essentially we want to send through an ID from this child component to the parent component. So if you remember from the input, we basically send through the specific code which contain the ID and the description which we are displaying here. But now that's basically data from the parent to the child. Now we want to look at sending the ID from the child to the parent. So let's have a look at this in code. So first thing I want to do is actually want to add a function for this remove button, which is basically just going to take in a ID. So on the node card component, I'm just going to create a function. I'm just calling it remove node. This basically is going to take in an ID, and over here we're going to have a click and remove node passing through the ID. So we know when we click the remove button, we're basically going to be calling this a remove node button, a remove node function, sorry, which basically has an ID, and then from here we basically want to let the parent know that the specific ID was clicked for removal. So we're going to basically be adding an output decorator over here. So we have add output, and I'm just going to call this. So this output is basically going to be an event. So think of it as a custom event, which basically almost in the same way as this click is kind of handled with the remove node. So in the sense where we're using event binding, but instead of using let's say the click or so, we're basically going to be using our custom event on the parent side, and we're going to be also using a function on the parent side to basically handle that event, or basically the callback for that event when that event gets emitted. So from this side, we're essentially going to be having an event. So this is going to be the remove node event, and as I said, we're going to be basically using the event emitter class, and this basically is going to tell Angular we want a custom event, and it's going to be of a specific type. So I'm going to say this is going to be of type number, and that's basically all we have to do to set this up. And then, as I said, from the remove node button, once this remove node function, once this is called, we essentially want to emit. So basically I'm calling the emit function, and we're going to basically pass through the ID, which is essentially what this and it's in the correct type that this expects. So from this child component, we can see now we have a remove node event, which is our custom event, and once you click the remove node on this specific card, it's basically going to emit an event with that ID. So on the parent side, we're basically going to go to the parent component, and over here, so in the same way, we're going to be using event binding. So if for the input decorator, we basically used property binding using the square braces. In this case, we're going to be using event binding, and this is essentially as this is the name of the property on the child component, the name of this event on the child component is remove node event. So in the same way, and the function on our parent side, let's say it's going to be remove node, and we're going to pass event. So this basically represents the data on this side. So in this case, it's going to be an ID, and it's going to basically be of type number. So on this side, we can expect the same. So for remove node, I'm just going to create this function for the parent. So remove node void, And then for remove node, we know we're getting in an ID, and that ID is type number. So for this, basically this is not going to be in terms of anything special in terms of the output or input decorators. I'm just purely just going to remove the specific, or I'm just going to filter basically this array to not include the ID that's coming through. User nodes dot filter. So that ID and this dot user nodes. So basically, yeah, this is not special to the tutorial in any way, but just basically filtering the nodes by the ID that's not or the ID that we've basically removed. So just returning this basically, if you're unfamiliar with this is basically just a filter, and this is basically the condition for the filter. So basically returning all the user nodes where the ID is not equal to that ID that we just passed through over here, and this is also getting and then the user nodes is basically getting overwritten. So I'm just going to save this, and then we'll just see it on the UI. So let's say we clear this one. You can see it just removes, clear this one, removes, and as you can see, it is removing also the correct item. As we are checking with the ID, we can see that the events are working correctly. So just to recap essentially what we've done, looking at the parent component, which will basically be a container component, you can see that when we want to get data to our child component, we essentially will use property binding, and we'll bind a property from the parent to the property on the child, and that property must be marked with the input decorator. When we want to get data from the child to the parent, we basically have to use the output decorator, and also we have to create a custom event, and then we basically use event binding to bind to that specific event. And once the event is emitted from the child, we make sure that we pass through the data that we want to pass through to the parent component, and then that basically gets received on the parent side, and we can basically do what we are required to do with that. That's essentially the tutorial. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks.